So welcome again, and we will proceed with our third topic for this panel, Re-Engineering the Economy, with the topic entitled The Engines of the Lebanese Economy by Dr. Ishaq Diwan, who will be joining us over Zoom. Dr. Diwan is the Professor of Economics and Chair of the Economy of the Arab World at Paris Sciences and Lettres. He is a PhD holder in Economics from the University of California, Professor of Economics at Paris Sciences et Lettres, Chair of the Economy of the Arab World, Paris Sciences et Lettres, previous World Bank Country Director in East then West Africa, Director of the Political Economy Program of the Economy Research Forum, where he's carrying out 2 projects on the study of crony capitalism and the analysis of opinion surveys, authors of multiple widely published books and articles focused on the political economy of the Middle East and broader development issues, such as the publication of A Political Economy of the Middle East 2015 and Crony Capitalism in the Middle East 2019. Dr. Ishaq Diwan will be joining us over Zoom. I don't know if you are able to hear me. Can you confirm that?
Yes, very well. How about you? Can you hear me?
Yes, fine, thank you. Allow me as well to introduce Dr. Wissam Harake. Dr. Harake is the World Bank Senior Economics for Lebanon. He joined the institution's Macroeconomics and Fiscal Management Global Practices in August 2013. Dr. Harake currently works on in-depth microeconomic research, analysis, monetary and market monitoring, and forecasts. He is the principal author and team leader for the Lebanon Economic Monitor, LEM, which is the main regular publication by the World Bank on Lebanon's macroeconomy and the source of the bank's macroeconomic forecasts. Before joining the bank, Dr. Harake worked at the Institute of International Finance in Washington, D.C. from 2011 till 2013 as an economist in the Africa Middle East Department, where he conducted in-depth macroeconomic analysis and forecast for selected countries in the region like Iraq, Ghana, Jordan, Kuwait, Libya, and Qatar. Dr. Harake, can you hear me?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I can hear
Perfect.
you. Am I heard?
Yes, you are heard very clearly. Let me now again remind the rules for our sessions, the ground rules for our session. So we'll have 40-minute session allocated as such, 15 minutes to Dr. Ishaq for presenting his paper, and then 7 minutes for Dr. Harake to comment and discuss and analyze the paper, and the remaining time will be allocated to have questions, Q&A from the public present here in the hall or joining us over Zoom. And we always encourage participation, active participation, to advocate for policy reforms. Dr. Ishaq, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for this generous introduction. Thank you to the Citizen Foundation for such a fascinating series of discussion, on the heart of the issues in Lebanon, of the challenges. Sorry not to be with you. I wish I was with you. I see from your long coffee break that you're having a good time meeting in face-to-face, and I see many friends also among the participants. So engineering the economy, this is a big topic. I just want to throw in some ideas to try to take a back seat a little bit, try to shape a bit of a strategic discussion about the choices that Lebanon may have for the future. And very much building on what Mr. Geagea, Mr. Saadi, Damien, and Soha already put on the table. There is already a lot on the table. How can we kind of intellectualize a little bit those choices and take the opportunity of the fact that we have to literally rebuild the economy from scratch to, for once, think harder about what should our future economy ideally look like. So there is a broad agreement now, it seems to me, certainly in this room, that we need a vision now for the future. Not ter'ia, as Dr. Saadi said, but a serious vision. That vision needs to be convincing. It needs to be convincing, partly because, for too long, certainly since the end of the Civil War, the politics has dictated what kind of economy we could have. And for the next phase, we need a very strong vision so that people get convinced to change the politics so it adapts to the economic potential of the country. It allows the country to make good on its potential. Governance needs to actually adapt to the economic potential. So we need a clear vision to have a better feel for this governance, but also so that we also understand the priorities of policy, what is more important than other, as opposed to this huge list that the World Bank or consultant can give us of the 300 things that we need to do to go to Norway. Strategically, what are the most important policies that can generate momentum and improvement that would lead us to this vision? And it's difficult to talk about vision because one can simply fantasize and be fanciful. So how to find a method to come up with a realistic vision that is grounded in history, in culture, and in the people and in the environment where we are. So that's the kind of questions we are now considering. It very much builds on the notion that the old model post-Civil War is dead and cannot be revived. It's a model built on hot money, on real estate, on construction, on non-tradable, on consumption. And I think we're all convinced that what is needed for the future is a productive economy built where the main engine is export. For a small economy as Lebanon is, export is crucial. And we know that this is possible. In the history of Lebanon, when we think of the country, it's a poor country. It had period with famine, it had difficult period, it's a country of immigration, but it did have in the recent past at least 2 economic booms built on productivity, innovation, and export. And this is the Mulberry silk episode of the late 19th century, which started building some wealth in the country. And then the second one, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the roaring growth, which had to do with production, with Arab entrepreneurs coming to Lebanon because of its liberalism, its freedom, its stability, and also because of the institutional policies and construction of the Shihabist areas that build really the institutions of the states and allowed this growth to continue. So this reminds us that for that vision to work, we will need a whole set of policies. We need the right macroeconomic framework, a framework that is oriented towards growth, which means with a competitive, flexible exchange rate, with access to finance, with the right infrastructure, and we can develop that. But also that we need to think of the what and the how. An important element, I think, in this thinking is to get an order of magnitudes. For a small open economy, exports need to be around 50% of GDP, or let me say at least 50% of GDP. So let's just play the numbers a little bit to get a sense of magnitudes. If we want to get back to our level of income before the crisis, $50-60 billion of GDP, this means we need exports of, let's say, $30 billion. It's not huge. It's feasible. It's if you think of our top Lebanese companies in the diaspora, it's 10 to 20 Murex or the transportation group in Marseille. So it's not huge, but it is much more than what we have today. Today, exports of goods and services, including tourism, are probably around 5-6 billion. So it's 5 times more. 5 times more. It means we need growth, not just to ignite growth, but to sustain it for 1 or 2 generations. So the model needs to be a model that is sustainable, that can continue for a long time. It's not a jump that will take us back to where we were. It's not a jump that would allow Lebanon to be what it can be. It's a movement over 20 years, over 1 or 2 generations. So sustainability is extremely central. The other 2 questions I want to put on the table is the what and the how. Now, the what, it would be good to build on our comparative advantages. With the Shar'a group, we had a very useful exercise where we spoke with many entrepreneurs, many of which are in the room, to try to figure out what are the comparative advantages of Lebanon. And what came out strongly is things we've talked about already in the previous session: skills, the education, the entrepreneurship, and the innovation. What economic liberties have given to the ethos of the Lebanese, the culture, the cultural content, what comes from the Nahda, the language, the music, the design, what makes the Lebanese brands, the connections to the world and to the diaspora, the environment of the country, nature, the beauty of the place that makes it special. So these are the comparative advantages. And I think a big issue for us is to figure out what this means for the coming 20 years. And one proposition I would put on the table is that it's not manufacturing, it's services. Our strategic goal should be to go towards services and not manufacturing. So towards, if you like, a Costa Rica model and not the Bangladesh model. So I, for example, Mr. Ismail, vision of a car factory in Tripoli. For various reasons. I mean, labor is not cheap, like others have said, and this is bad for the environment, it could be bad for health, but also we're in an age of robotization. China is the factory of the world. Manufacturing exports are not sectors that are growing, they're shrinking. We are at an era of deglobalization, really. What is growing fastest in international trade are services, actually. Services, and because we are in the era of digitalization, of the communication revolution, and so this is, I mean, the way the world is going is actually very favorable to the comparative advantages of Lebanon. Never been a manufacturing hub, but we could actually dream of being a service hub. Services exported through digital communication means. We could be selling in the region and in the world accounting services, agriculture, education, health, legal services, advertising, distribution, e-commerce, all kinds of things that these could be. We could imagine creating, if you like, a virtual type of Dubai where high salaries, you attract talent with a promise of good living in nature, good living in terms of culture, in terms of liberties. In a way, if you like, the future could be based on a digital Nahda type, where design, or a Nahda on steroid, where culture is really exported. A big opportunity is in the Arab world, by the way. I mean, the Arab population is about 5% of global population. And what you look at the World Wide Web content, only 1% is in Arabic. So there's a huge space for expansion there. So I think this is one issue. Of course, there will be a role for agriculture and craft, especially, you know, as Soha and Riyadh have described, especially the high value type that is branded to the diaspora, this organic agribusiness. And in manufacturing, also, as Mr. Ismail said, there are high-tech niches Lebanon has been good at that can continue and provide some diversity. So about the how, the sustaining, I think, is very important. And I would put perhaps four issues on the table to think about as we want to focus on how to flesh out this model. This first an issue about liberalism versus states. And liberalism, Michel Geagea maybe was wrong or maybe he was right for his time, but Lebanon cannot be any more a commercial hub. But certainly he was right on liberalism. It is very much in the Lebanese culture, this economic freedom, and this needs to continue. But this doesn't deny at all the role of the state, quite the opposite. Our system right now is anything but liberal. It is monopolized, it is corrupt, and it does not favor competition or entrepreneurship. What you need is a much stronger role for the state in avoiding exploitation, in protecting nature, in preventing monopolies, and in offering services. Of course, education is key. Many people have already stressed it, and we are at risk of losing education excellence, which is at the heart of the comparative advantage. So a much better balance between liberalism of this and the state is one dimension. The other dimension is inequality. The country is right now extremely unequal, among the most unequal in the world. The kind of model that I've talked about would use a diversity of skills, from low to high skills. And so in a way, it fosters inclusive growth, and that's a good basis. But then it has to allow for social mobility, and services and education is their key. And it has to protect the labor market also. There's no question that there's risk of excess migration, for example, in low skills. And what you need is to move towards middle and high skills. But perhaps most importantly, I would say the environment and decentralization can fit centrally in this model. The environment is what would attract people, and decentralization is what would allow centers of growth to compete against each other across the country. I mean, basically, this is a model where you have small communities that are connected to the world, that attract talent from the diaspora and from elsewhere to produce services to the world in a clean and beautiful environment. So I will stop that, and I would simply conclude by saying it is a good time to be dreaming about the future, and let's try to figure out a little bit. Let's try to sharpen the debate around a few issues, so that we use the opportunity of recreating the model to create the right model for the century in which we live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diwan, for your special intervention. And it's now time to listen to Dr. Harake and his analysis to the proposition of Dr. Diwan. Dr. Harake, the floor is yours. The online floor is yours.
So hello again, everyone. Just to begin by thanking the Citizen Foundation, Lebanese Citizen Foundation, for organizing this event and hosting me. With the World Bank, we've collaborated with the foundation previously or recently with the Lebanon Public Finance Review. So we're happy to continue this collaboration through this event. Just to huge congratulations to Dr. Diwan on a very timely perspective on growth. I think this is a short note as I received it. This is a short note meant to incentivize the discussion on a very strategic topic here. The discourse in the country has been highly focused on macro stability, which remains a prior action in the Lebanon episode, and highly overdue. But the growth story is the real recovery story in the end. Macroeconomic stabilization achieves exactly that: stabilization, certainty, some credibility, visibility. But the recovery comes from Lebanon's growth story and this is and I would go beyond and it's not a dream. I think the note is well pivoted in the Lebanon experience, and nobody is more an expert on that than Dr. Diwan. And lays out, I mean, we always hear productive, non-productive. It lays out the narrative very succinctly. It takes Lebanon's comparative advantages, and here maybe there'll be different views on that, but certainly some of the consensus around these advantages lays out targets and objectives, realistic targets and objectives per the narrative listed, and links again to the macroeconomic fundamentals, right? So it is consistent in the sense that, you know, all these components had to fit in consistently, and macroeconomics also comes in from the growth angle as well as from the stabilization angle in the manner that was explained by Dr. Ishaq. Conceptually, if I may, as I understood it, as I saw it, it takes us back to the drawing boards, very necessary at this point, because as well articulated, the post-Civil War growth model is dead, never to come back. So the pre-2019 economic fundamentals will not come back, no matter how much we hope that they would. It presents, it's heavy on consistency as well. It's one thing to do, to fit consistently with the macroeconomics, with the politics, with the comparative advantage. So it's heavy on consistency as well, and that's key to success of any idea. And again, conceptually, and it pivots to Lebanon's experience, both its failures and its successes, as seen by the author, but definitely an important angle, because if you purely link to global experiences, you would leave a big gap there. Now, it's difficult to add the value. It's difficult to present relevant ideas in addition to what the note presents. I will try. Again, it's a short note, so it's not meant to be inclusive of all or comprehensive of all topics. It's not meant to be heavily analytical. It's more a strategic piece, and it does achieve that purpose. But if I may introduce a couple of angles here, and it's just to help us think through. And we've been at the World Bank. We've been trying to pivot towards the growth story. I mean, we've been doing a lot of macro and macro financial monitoring and analysis and the such, and we're trying to see when is the best opportunity to pivot to a growth story, and it is of course part of the bank mandate here, but as important determinants or important factors here would be some visibility, some stability, some certainty at two levels, right? The political scene, which is, we're not going to discuss heavily here, but definitely this is the environment in which the economy and any growth model would fit in. So no economy is isolated from its political realm, but at the same time as well, purely macroeconomics. The macroeconomics that we all feel and see now determine the resources the country has for its growth prospects. Sadly, with time, these resources are diminishing. So you have less and less to work with to build on a growth vision, to take it from a vision stage to more realistic implementation stage. So the macroeconomy is relevant at the beginning and is relevant in its consistency component of the growth model, and we do not know what currency Lebanon will be using. We would like it to have the flexibility that allows it the competitiveness in order to export. Current default path, sadly, is in the other trajectory. It's a de facto dollarization, for example, right? So the growth story would differ if we end up a de facto dollar. We are currently de facto, but if we cannot get out of it, the growth story might differ at that level. Of course, the human capital left in the country to carry on and implement this growth story is currently also on a negative dynamic, and that is the core essence of the growth model, or the resources for your growth model, so that we also don't know where that is ending. So not to stress that, but and not to depress everyone, but it is important to recognize the country is actually on a transition. So gravity is working quite heavily here. The transition is likely, although we don't know where the country will end up, but is likely to make Lebanon look as different to before the crisis as it was after the civil war to pre-civil war, right? So and we can go back and collect some memories on our work in the post-civil war period, whether sectorally or whether the growth model. And there was a reason why things weren't working as they were being advanced. It's just the political economy of the post-civil war Lebanon was quite different. And we were imagining things potentially for what Lebanon was pre-civil war. So both in its economic location regionally and its resources available locally to implement these growth model. And that didn't work over 15 years. Instead, money was being made heavily. There was a lot of wealth, I wouldn't say created, I would say diverted, but there was a lot of wealth circulating in the economy based on a completely different model. Of course, eventually it burst and it has its own inconsistencies within it, but that lasted for a long time as well. So and what we're likely to have is probably a similarly different Lebanon. So Lebanon is changed permanently as the Lebanon we've known in the post-civil war period, and maybe this is some of this or a good part of it is welcome. And it has gotten even much further from the pre-civil war period. So do we want to maybe challenge our notions of what is the comparative advantage of Lebanon? What are the comparative advantages of Lebanon? And I do just to noting the time limit here, and here of course known by all, linkages to the region, economic linkages to the region, just like the economy cannot be outside of its political realm, it cannot be outside of its geo-economic realm. So not just applicable in the Lebanon case, but in the other case. So what are the envisioned? And of course, the discourse is quite divisive in the country. What are the linkages to the countries in the region? Syria, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Jordan, for example. And where does Lebanon fit here, both as a competitor or as a complementary, or where does Lebanon fit in the supply chain here? Too much focus, of course, GCC will remain important for Lebanon. Tourism will remain important. These types of flows will remain important. One has to question on the over-dependence on the linkages maybe to the GCC, just because GCC is not interested in that anymore. It doesn't look like it's interested in that type of a relationship anymore. And B, I mean, the whole geo-economy has changed as well. So something to, and again, key determinants in Lebanon's growth model. Maybe if I have some constructive critique here. I don't know. I got the impression that the technology factor and the high competitive factor can skip over very classical and very traditional infrastructure built, whether political or economic, or actual physical infrastructure built across the region. Lastly, I welcome the discussion on and maybe, I don't know finally, but at this level, welcome the discussion on the liberal model. And this can be taken from a global perspective. globally, this model has changed as well. The sort of neoliberal model of the 1990s and early 2000s has also, one can also say that most countries have moved on from that to some extent. I think at the operational level, we still have challenges how to translate this expanded intellectual space where we can talk about models coming from the East, which is really a mixed model. And many view that as really the only recent success story in development. Again, not in wealth creation, in development, a much more comprehensive factor here where you lift masses up from poverty. So how do you bring that in, right? I don't know if we can pivot romantically, continue to pivot romantically to a liberal model where globally it has moved. And in the Lebanon case, and maybe this is where I might have something specific here to
Dr.
not to
Harake,
disagree
Dr.
on.
Harake, not to interrupt you, but we need to give time also for the presence to ask questions. So if you can still have just
No.
one.
I will conclude right now.
Thank you.
I will conclude right now. So the failures we have seen also can be in the Lebanon model can be suggested that this is what the liberal model can ultimately lead to, right? This deregulation, the process of self-deregulation and lack of regulation, that might be the natural course of a heavily liberalized model. And again, we've seen that globally in 2008 global financial crisis. I'll stop here and happy.
Thank you very much,
thank
Dr.
everyone.
Harake, for your analysis. And now it's time to have questions from the public. I see a lot of raised hands, so if we can.
Hello, Ishaq. Thank you for being with us. It's always a pleasure to see you, even remotely. Thank you, Wissam, for this frank and candid presentation. I remember that the last time Wissam Harake spoke at USG, it was a few months before the 2019 uprising. We had organized also a very big conference about the McKinsey report and about CEDR, and you were also one of the few among the experts who warned that what was being done at the time was certainly not enough to prevent the upcoming collapse. And I also remember at the same panel, I think economist Ali Mbayid, who said that McKinsey and CEDR look like deja vu, it's incomplete, it's ignoring the elephant in the living room, which is elite capture, patronage, massive corruption, sectarianism, lack of sovereignty, etc. So thank you both for speaking so candidly. This was one of the most interesting panels in the last couple of days. I have a question for Ishaq. You were perfectly spot on in what you said about Michel Geagea. He was prophetic about many issues, about Palestine. His views on the compatibility between liberalism and the Lebanese temper were also right. But today, in retrospect, we can no longer see Lebanon as playing the role that Geagea had envisioned as a bridge between East and West. We have been superseded by Dubai and many others. And just like, Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winner, said that today's neoliberalism has nothing to do with what Adam Smith had in mind, we could say that today's Lebanese economy has not a lot to do with Michel Geagea's view. So what you did today is brilliantly debunk the idea that Lebanon remains a free market liberal economy. You correctly reminded the audience that our economy is mostly controlled by cartels and monopolies, and that the state still has an important role to play in order for us to reach a genuinely free economy. I'm directing this question to you because Wissam is still with the World Bank. You have worked with the World Bank and with international institutions. They have engaged in a lot of self-criticism and soul-searching in the 1990s. They have studied their experiences in Latin America and in other places. Do you think it is enough? Do you think today institutions like the World Bank and the IMF are playing a positive role in Lebanon. I am one of those who think that when we are faced with such a ruling kleptocracy, we should rely on institutions like the IMF because they are often more progressive or at least more transparent with clearer criteria than what we are accustomed to. So having worked with these institutions in the past, to what extent do you think Lebanon should give them credence and work with them to get out of this current crisis? Thank you both.
Dr. Diwan?
Do you want me to answer? Okay. Thank you, Karim, and thank you, Wissam. On Michel Geagea, you know, as I said, when you develop a vision, the big question is you have too many degrees of freedom. So what do you rely on? So in my little note, I chose to rely on Michel Geagea's liberalism, on Shihab building of the state to regulate this capitalism. On the Nahda as kind of the driver of kind of the new Lebanese brand that is based on culture, and also on Antonio's Shaheen, which I think is really a root of this yearning for equality and with the peasant reform, but also the union movement of the 60s and the 70s that was really broken by the ruling regime as a condition for the kind of governance system in which we live, and that needs to be rehabilitated. So I think this together provides us with a historical basis for the kind of vision that I'm putting forth here. Now, in terms of the role of the World Bank and the IMF, there is a interesting evaluation by the IMF department of their policies, adjustment policies in the world and in the region that just came a few months ago. And they recognize that being totally unable to drive economic growth. You know, they're good at, they come to a place that is bankrupt and they provide a little bit of finance and discipline for the country to tighten its belt and stabilize the situation. But in most cases, you don't see growth after. And they recognize that. And they say there's no substitute really for a national plan. You need a national plan. National politics is crucial. The national vision is absolutely crucial. So they can play a certain role. They are a tool, but they cannot substitute for a national vision, for national politics. And I think what this conference is doing is really sounding the alarm and telling the people, the polity, the population that there is no substitute for a political process that figures out where we want to be, given our history, given our culture, given our assets and our liabilities, and then hard work at a local level in order to make this happen. Face reality, face the tough reality, make choices and adapt your governance system to that. So in a way, I'm thinking of this vision exercise, this talk about the vision, not necessarily as a plan that we would follow, but as a political tool. This is a political tool to figure out where we could be if we were governed differently, so that we can actually be convinced to put more effort to change reality and get closer to the potential.
Thank you. Other question, please, I would like to remind everyone, let's have short, direct questions for the sake of time and the profit for the session. So, yes.
Thank you, Ishaq. Mohammed Faour from AUB. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation, much timely. One note, though, is that when we talk about the general discourse, we focus primarily on the financial stabilization aspect, which is the way it has been pitched is more of a backward-looking exercise. Losses have been allocated, we need to distribute these losses, and that's very true. And you add this angle, you amongst others, that, okay, we need to have also a forward-looking exercise, a much-needed forward-looking exercise, which is, okay, how can we get to a point where we realize growth rates of 5 to 7% at the very least? So the question is, now, the way things are being portrayed is as if both of these, the loss allocation exercise, which seems to be primarily a backward-looking exercise, and what kind of economy we want, which is more of a forward-looking exercise, as if they're two distinct things. And then comes the question of, okay, how can we bridge those two together? In the sense that the loss allocation exercise, which is very necessary, entails a massive, I wouldn't say destruction of wealth, because the wealth has been destroyed anyways, but an acknowledgement of the massive wealth destruction, whereas on the other hand, the more forward-looking economic aspect is about how can we regenerate wealth on aggregate. And because this loss allocation exercise entails massive sacrifices, for people to buy into these sacrifices, you need that element which is more forward-looking, i.e. that, well, yes, sacrifices are needed. However, these sacrifices are precisely so that we could get to that point. And this is where you talk about the economic vision being a political tool comes into play, that it gives, it enables, it somewhat makes it easier for people to buy into the much necessary sacrifices of the loss allocation exercise. And that's the only comment I had. Thank you very much.
Dr. Diwan?
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. This is really very useful, I think, comment that you put on the table. You know, it makes me think of Nelson Mandela when he came out of jail. And it's the most unequal society. And, you know, he represents the 80% of the population that is extremely poor in this very unequal society. It would take 2-3 generations at least of good schooling and access to market and less discrimination to bridge that gap. And yet he manages to promote the idea of let's not destroy everything. Let's use our assets and rehabilitate them, and let's progressively move over 2-3 generations to where we want to be, to that vision that he puts on the table. It's amazing, and it's built on exactly what you're talking about, confidence in the future. How do you rebuild trust so that actually people are willing to accept the difficult situation in which they are, and maintain stability and work hard over years to reach the potential? I think it definitely takes confidence in the future, and it takes a process of rebuilding trust gradually, because it's all about solving coordination issues at all kind of level for the public good. And so you need to go back and, you know, maybe the big shareholders of banks would accept, how would they accept their losses? Basically, they have to think that their kids would do much better in an economy that has hope, that is growing in a good way, in an exciting way, and their kids will convince them that you stop holding this country hostage to a short-term loss. You know, let's instead dream about an exciting future. So yeah, the element of confidence is crucial to make stabilization possible.
Thank you, Dr. Diwan. One last question before closing the topic. Any other question from the audience?
Wissam mentioned the Lebanese model. Dr. Diwan, you mentioned trade in services versus trade in goods. Firstly, in the division between trade in services and trade of goods, where do you see the ideal, how much trade in services versus trade in goods and exports could Lebanon aspire to achieve over, let's say, the next 3 years? Could you plot a map on that? And secondly, As the Lebanese model, one of my long-term agonies in Lebanon has been that much of economic views have been imported into this country. And if I want to remember a conversation with an economist who extrapolates a Lebanese model versus salt water and seawater and whatever you have in Europe as economic schools, I'm at a loss. So could you write up a Lebanon model of economic insight based on the experience of the last 30 years and even the far back experience going back to what Dr. Fadi was referring to, namely this integrated trade and manufacturing paradigm of the Phoenicians, mythical or not, but the Murex and everything else. Could we have a model how Lebanon can show the world to be a better economy from a small country rather than from the American behemoths? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's interesting that you've said Phoenicians and Murex, because the new Murex, actually, the successful firm produced software for the financial sector worldwide, not just in the region. And it would take Lebanon 10 Murex situated in Lebanon to achieve the 30 billion target that I spoke about. So we do live in a world where it is actually services rather than the movement of people that are driving international trade. They are growing at 25% a year now, and this is what's being added to value chains. That there is a digital and communication revolution that is starting to sweep through the world. So if we look, I will not map these things at this stage. We're just discussing concepts, but I'm quite convinced that this is where the world is going, and I would argue that this is, if Lebanon has to choose strategically, this is what it wants to choose. This is not a dream. We see seeds of what I'm talking about. We see a lot of small firms in Lebanon, and Rami is an example, that have Murex and many others that are actually exporting services. The problem is that they're exporting themselves also to Dubai. What I'm talking about is actually having a virtual Dubai in Lebanon. And instead of attracting consultants from all over the world at very high rate to live in air-conditioned towers in the middle of the desert, beautiful Dubai, it's a completely a real place with a real culture, with real nature, in a decentralized way to produce services. A vision is perhaps too early, map it exactly, but one that is feasible and that is very coherent with the way the world is going. It also transcends a little bit the region. I mean, it is not outside the region because there is a lot of demand in the region and in the GCC in particular for this kind of services, as opposed to people, because migration is not, given Saudization goals, is not the future anymore. But there is a need, but it transcends the region. I mean, the web takes you anywhere in the world, and especially where there is a Lebanese diaspora that can act as your agent, as your consumers, as your producers. The diaspora can oscillate around Lebanon and give us a little bit of a global Lebanon that we already have to some extent, with people coming back in or leaving and circulating, if you like, around the world, but using Lebanon as a base also for education, for health, for marriage, for what have you, retirement. So,
Thank you, Dr. Diwan. I would like to tell everyone that our forum is running live over Facebook and YouTube for your friends or anyone who would like to join online virtually. And as well, all the papers presented by our authors will be posted over the website of the Lebanese Citizen Foundation, so we can go over the website, comment, interact as usual. Thank you, Dr. Diwan. Thank you, Dr. Harake, for this enriching topic.